minutes of remarks before we get started. Our discussion today is focused on economic security and technology cooperation. And economic security has become a significant policy issue for governments around the world over the last decade. Really, I think it's sort of, trying to understand what it means. It's an attempt by governments to ensure that their economies are somewhat insulated from the dangers of supply chains, to make sure that they've got the inputs they need to keep certain sectors active and working as they should be. This is especially true for sectors of the economy that governments have decided are high value, the critical technologies that are looking for electric growth. For the United States, this has been very much framed in the context of geopolitical competition with China. And so we've seen over 4 successive administrations various policies designed to insulate US high-tech sectors from unfair competition with China, exacerbated obviously during the pandemic when there were major shocks to the global trade, global shipping system, and then more recently following Russia's latest chapter in its invasion of Ukraine, which also had a major impact on international shipping and security. From NBR's research, we can actually follow a lot of continuity between what the Obama administration was beginning to talk about, what the first Trump administration began to do, what the Biden administration continued, and based on the last 8 days, what we can expect will continue to be the case in the second Trump administration. In Tokyo, it's a very similar story. 10 years ago, Japan was subject to a fairly significant set of export restrictions by the People's Republic of China on rare earth imports that were imported into Japan's technology industries following diplomatic disputes over the Senkaku Islands. And so within the policymaking community in Tokyo, there's been a decade now of discussion and policy reform specifically designed to address the question of economic security. This has included a new ministerial level position that was established in October of 2021, and the passage of an Economic Security Promotion Act in May of 2022, which has just finished a 2-year phasing period. And so within the Japanese policymaking establishment, economic security is really a key element of how the government in Japan now thinks about the region moving forward. And the third and final point I'll make by way of introduction is just to stress that the long-standing US-Japan alliance relationship and partnership is equally strong and deep in this space of economic and technology security cooperation. Going back to October 2019, the US and Japan signed a digital trade agreement that was drawing from some of the best practices from the US MCA. April 2021, the Competitiveness and Resilience Partnership was signed between the two countries, governing mobile technologies and 5G and hopefully 6G networks in the future. In March 2023, following the Biden administration's IRA, Japan and the US signed the Strengthening Critical Minerals Supply Chain Agreement that would allow Japanese investment into those sectors within the United States. And then also in 2023, we had the first meeting of the US-Japan Economic and Consultative Committee. Shorthand is the Japan-US Economic 2+2. This is a meeting of the Minister of Economy, Trade and Industry, Ministry of Foreign Affairs on the Japanese side, and the Secretary of Commerce and Secretary of State on the US side. And so at the government level, there's very deep collaboration and discussion about these sets of issues. During our panel discussion over lunch today, we'll have 4 expert speakers sitting here that will really help us dig into this a little bit further. Before we get to them, I'd like to invite our partner for this event, Consul General Iori Makoto from the Japanese consulate here in Seattle, to come up and say a few remarks. Consul General Iori has been in Seattle since October of 2023. He's had a series of postings across the Asia-Pacific region, including Canada, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And his own background is in economics, and so couldn't think of a better person to invite to the podium and offer some opening remarks to our session today. Consul General Iori.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. And for those who are not based in this area, welcome to Seattle in a beautiful day today. 10 years ago, China introduced its Made in China 2025 initiative. signaling its ambition to enhance its position in advanced science and technology. While the policy itself focuses on economic and industrial development, concerns have gradually grown internationally, particularly in the United States, over the potential use of those technologies to bolster China's military capabilities or to enhance domestic surveillance. Over the past few years, there has been a heightened focus on preventing the outflow of cutting-edge technology to China. This issue has become especially critical with the advent of artificial intelligence, often referred to as a new industrial revolution, which began to take shape a couple of years ago. Protecting key technologies like semiconductors and manufacturing equipment is a matter of vital importance. In October 2022, the Biden administration initiated export controls on these technologies and further strengthened them in October 2023. Towards the end of Biden's term, additional measures were implemented to expand restrictions to memory-related technologies and to prevent unauthorized transfers by third countries. However, the recent release of China's DeepSeek version 3 and RI has sent shockwaves around the world. Built with NVIDIA's 800 GPUs, hardware specially designated to circumvent US export restrictions, it is said to rival the capability of OpenAI's O1 at a fraction of the cost, approximately 1% of the expenses associated with comparable large language models. This development has raised concerns about the effectiveness of the Biden administration's export control measures and has shaken confidence in the United States' technological superiority in this field. Adding to the complexity, it is reportedly estimated that approximately one-third of software engineers, particularly those specializing in AI at leading US tech firms like GAFA, are of Chinese origin. A notable example is Zhang Jianhong, a former global vice president at NVIDIA, who funded more threads in China to produce GPUs compatible with NVIDIA's CUDA ecosystem. This highlights how expertise acquired in the United States is being leveraged to advance China's technological capabilities. The release of DeepSeek R1, timed with the inauguration of the new Trump administration, have reignited debates over the future of export controls and broader strategies for ensuring economic security in the face of China's advancements. I'm looking forward to today's discussion with this esteemed group of experts as we explore these pressing challenges. I hope this event will contribute to further the strategic development of Japan-US relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Consul General Iori. And thank you all for coming today. I would like to welcome the first panel to the stage, Michael Beeman and Saori Katada. We'll have two panels today. This first one will be taking a bigger picture look at U.S. and Japanese approaches to economic security under the Trump and Yoshida administrations. And then the second panel will focus in a little more on the role of emerging technology, export controls, and tools used to carry out these policies. So with me today, we have a number of excellent speakers on this first panel. Our first speaker, Saori Katada, a professor of international relations at the University of Southern California and the director of the Center for International Studies. She is also a non-resident fellow at the National Bureau of Asian Research. And prior to joining USC, she was a researcher at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. She's also the author a few years ago of an excellent book called Japan's New Regional Reality, Geoeconomic Strategy in the Asia-Pacific. And then also joining us is Michael Beeman. He is an author and an expert on U.S. foreign and public policy. He served for a lengthy period of time as a senior trade official in the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, and most recently as the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Japan, Korea, and APAC. In that role, he led the negotiation of the U.S.-Korea Free Trade Agreement and the U.S.-Japan Trade Agreement, among other issues. He also has a recent book out last October called Talking Out America's New Trade Policy in the Asia-Pacific and Beyond. So with that, I will invite them both to make opening remarks, beginning with Dr. Katada.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's such an honor to be here. This is a gorgeous building. I was here last year, I believe. I really enjoyed visiting Seattle from Los Angeles and our fire was here. So it's nice to be able to breathe here. I would like to, my role is kind of put the context of where things are in the US and Japan. Obviously, President Wills have already put a wonderful context of how important US-Japan relations is and their collaboration in the Indo-Pacific economic security. And Biden and Kishida, the both leaders, have really deepened this relationship in the context of the challenge that both countries face. Now comes this new challenge of with the new leadership. You know, obviously Trump 2.0 started 8 days ago with hundreds of these executive orders. I don't know which one was picked. It's kind of like that spaghetti on the wall, but you know, it might be some obviously major changes in the works. At the same time, Ishiba has been in the leadership for a few months now, but kind of it's leading a minority-majority party of LDP. So altogether, some of these political uncertainty loom large in this context. So my quick remark is talking about how does this new leadership affect the U.S. and Japan's role in the Indo-Pacific security, as well as how this relationship is going to go. So again, I have a less challenging task, mostly focusing on Japan than Michael's, which has to focus on more the U.S. side. But I would like to reiterate here that relationship and cooperation between Japan and the U.S. is vital. Especially so now with the intensification of the U.S.-China tension, rivalry, with the new technology coming in the pipes already revealed. At the same time, there are many changes within Asia and the Pacific. So first of all, the BRICS expansion, many of the Southeast Asian nations are now taking their bets by joining the BRICS, which is led by China and various more authoritarian regimes. Also, the kind of a very important partner of South Korea's political environment is not very certain. So altogether, this collaboration between the U.S. and Japan is now even more acute and needed in 2025 moving forward. At the same time, so economic security overall is arrangement that require collaboration. There's a lot of discussion about collective resilience, supply chain resilience based on many of the collective action. The companies which are led by the government policies has to be feeling secure that they are not going to be cheated upon because other companies from other countries in the Indo-Pacific would be doing something against the rules that's been set by the government. So altogether, this is a really critical component. For Japan, and as already mentioned, Japanese government has a pretty kind of a leg up in terms of putting the various economic security institutions and legal procedures in place. 2022 forward, many of the laws have already kicked in where the government instruments have been quite vibrantly built. Meanwhile, this is now the phase where the companies have to go along with it more proactively rather than kind of thinking about this as a compliance issue. This is an issue where the companies would really kind of take advantage in some ways of becoming more resilient as well as more business more successful in this environment overall. So one of the things that Ishiba has mentioned in his address in January was that economic intelligence is a very important component of how companies can deal with this kind of challenging environment. Meanwhile, we are leaving Trump's position in Michael's hand, but the supply chain resilience continues to be a very important element for the U.S. security strategy. So, in some ways, there are some hopeful features and some concerning elements between the U.S. and Japan and in this context. Obviously, Japan is the largest foreign direct investors in the United States now. Many companies have invested significantly, and as you saw in the news, quite widespreadly, Mr. Son's SoftBank will be starting investing $100 billion in the AI and the various technology in the United States that's being promised. So altogether, that's a very hopeful sign that Japan will continue to be engaged not only through the government-to-government links, but with the businesses included. Meanwhile, the concerning issue is obviously everybody's mind is that Nippon Steel's acquisition of the U.S. Steel has been blocked, and Trump, at least in his electoral election campaign, said he's going to continue to block it. We don't know if that's going to be the case or so, but this is the kind of implemented on national security ground. So altogether, I think the concern here is that how much of this economic security issues really on its own end and protect the importance of the technology in these countries, and how much of it is used for a protectionist and more nationalist growth. So that's the question. I would like to add, and there was a few quick notes about Japan's strategy around Trump 2.4. So Japan is now diversifying its partner quite a bit. And I think the partners would need Japan to really have some security, I guess some comfort of mind in getting through the Trump 2.0. So one is that Japan's strengthening its collaboration with ASEAN nations. Trump risk is looming large. That's why Indonesia has already joined BRICS, and Malaysia is talking about it. When Ishiba visited these countries, Japan was strengthening the collaboration with them, especially when it comes to economic security issues and sea lane protection. The other component of collaboration of the third party, of US Japan, beyond US Japan, is Europe and UK. So now UK and Japan are establishing economic 2+2, which is the kind of mirrors the US image, and the economic security cooperation is one of the main topics on that. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Katada, and over to you, Dr. Beeman.
Great, thank you. Thank you also for the invitation, and we get the view. I don't know what to say, but I will be focused on all of your attention and try and help interpret, maybe is the best word I can use, what maybe you're seeing in Washington. I think everyone has their own sense and ideas. Some of it's quite transparent if you just listen. But what it's really reflecting is a fundamental shift that's been going on in the United States in terms of kind of views of the economy, how it relates to jobs, how it relates to U.S. national welfare and economic security. This has been going on, I think, as Michael mentioned, sort of, really some of the antecedents of this you can trace back to the Obama administration. But certainly it's just going like gangbusters now. So let me try and induce a bit of interpreting if I can for you. Because I'm happy and would wish to be able to be here and talk about all the wonderful opportunities that there are for the U.S. and Japan to cooperate in this space, because there are a lot of complementary areas and a lot of opportunities. But I think in order to understand the opportunities, we also have to understand what the actual obstacles really are that are being decided now in Washington before getting to that point. So it is a new reality that we're living in, I think, but it is part of a transition the United States is making. And this is really a shift, there's many ways to describe this shift, but at least in terms of one way of thinking about it is a shift away from focus on rules and on agreements and more of a focus on results and outcomes and dealing with concerns. So that means sometimes ignoring the rules and the agreements to expand the space, to flood the zone, if you will. And that is, of course, I think certainly the brand that President Trump brings to the White House. Where does Japan fit in? Well, I think it's helpful if you think about some of what the United States is trying to accomplish if you think about it in terms of kind of how Japan has approached traditionally for decades, some of these issues of economic security, we all remember the terrible 3/11 tragedies in Japan. And one of the moments that kind of caught my eye coming out of all those terrible things that were happening was a real panic and kind of focus in Japan on the idea that Japan didn't have an autonomous robot that was able to go into these kinds of dangerous places and assess the situation or manipulate things, turn off valves or whatever. It had wonderful robotics, but it didn't have that. But the United States had that technology. Boston Scientific made this robot that could do that. And it kind of sort of set off as national champion sort of attitude and sense that rather than buy from the US, Japan should be doing this itself and making it itself. So I just bring that example up because I think if you think about what the US is doing in those terms, a lot of it sounds not dissimilar or unfamiliar to Japan. The question is where, how this is manifest. And of course, this is changing a fundamental view in the United States of economic security. Kind of a sense that the US should kind of do it all itself, basically, is certainly an unfamiliar approach. Because the US was preaching the idea of interdependence and rules-based trade and open markets, and the markets will decide as long as we have rules and we're all relying on them, we'll all do better. China, of course, challenged that, and the US and Japan very much saw eye to eye on a lot of the China concerns, and some of my work at USTR was exactly in this area, and it was really forged around, as mentioned in the beginning, the rare earth, the threat to Japan of China holding back on rare earths. At the time, the U.S. focused on using the WTO and with Japan, and Japan brought a case, won the case in the WTO, but the U.S. isn't really focused on that anymore, to my point about kind of moving away from focus on rules and agreements and more on just getting actual results. So let me just summarize briefly a few areas where I think we'll see continued cooperation and areas where I think it's important to think a little differently about where the U.S. and Japan can match up. Because as I'll say at the end, and I'll just preview this, US and Japan are really going to need each other. So let's just get to that. I'll just put that at the end. So I think in areas where both countries see eye to eye and continue to prioritize protecting our economies and people from outside threats, especially obviously China. So this is issues like cybersecurity, issues like diversification and approaches to reduce reliance on critical minerals that we're dependent on from China. Issues like counterterrorism and port security and cooperation in those kinds of spaces, vulnerability to Chinese systems technology, so autonomous vehicles or cranes or whatever, wherever there's Chinese software in systems that the US and Japanese economies and people are depending on to take that as a threat. So there is a wealth of opportunity in this space, I think, to really focus on how the US and Japan can continue to coordinate and cooperate in this area. But, it's economic cooperation, and I've experienced this. We've had many dialogues with Japan over many years, and it is not always easy. And it's not always easy because there are economic rivalries going on. There are corporate, interests. There's economic factors in these. When you're talking about the economic security when it comes to production and imports and exports and who's relying on whom for what, basically. I know there'll be a focus on export controls later, so I won't focus on that. But this is one of the areas I think is going to be a really important area to watch and see exactly where the Trump administration plans to go. The U.S. has already been testing Japan's, I think, patience with sort of kind of reaching a level of concern in Japan about how far it's going to take these export controls. So the number of sectors in which is traditionally focused on non-proliferation, non-nuclear proliferation, and on military hardware, military systems, now is being expanded greatly into what is traditionally been considered more the commercial space. And so the degree to which Japan has been going along with that and tolerating it, I think, have been an area of a lot of focused discussions between the Biden administration and the Kishida administration. But now I think that will be, continue, but I think it will be tested because I'm not sure how much further Japan is going to be comfortable with this heading and how many more sectors the U.S. can add on to this list of export controls. because it is affecting Japanese production and Japanese goods. Because if there's any U.S. technology in a foreign whatever, then the Commerce Department can kind of come down on them and basically set some rules. But I think that for the most part, the U.S. is going to continue to focus on primarily avoiding these commercial technologies being obtained or in the tools for making them by China, essentially. So I think this is where Japan and the U.S. will have some alliance. I think what is unclear at this point is which sectors, and what are the triggers that the Trump administration is going to look at in this area to kind of force things on its allies and partners to go along with its goal of walling off these from China. Another area, of course, is tariffs, and I think we're all living in a very different world. And some of the inclinations were there in the first administration; they just didn't burst out into the open. I can assure you, I know personally, tariffs that didn't happen. I could list a few cases that never made it to prime time. But I think what's really unclear, there is this goal, there's whatever you or I think or whatever anyone thinks about it, there is this belief, fundamental belief, that tariffs are a way to force a reindustrialization of America, whatever you or I think about that. Japan has generally had low tariffs, but has used other tools to kind of maintain an industrial infrastructure. Korea is in a similar situation. And the U.S. is trying to do this with a pretty blunt tool. And we'll see how this goes. But it's also very unclear if the goal is universal tariffs. So even if Japanese companies here are producing critical goods like semiconductors or whatever, or in Japan, we're still relying on a lot of inputs from Japan to make those semiconductors, gases and materials and the rest. And so we're going to put blanket tariffs on everything so that those are going to be even more expensive to produce in the United States. Or we're going to focus in particular sectors. So just a couple of days ago, the president talked about tariffs on, we have chips, or I have a list here somewhere. It's semiconductors, pharmaceutical, steel, aluminum, and copper, I believe. So kind of a sector approach to this. Or is it going to be country by country, right? Are these tariffs going to be done? So I think we don't have the answers to this. But I do believe, based on my experience in the first administration, there is a belief that and an intent now to try and carry this further and to take these tariffs further. So this is going to be an enormous challenge to the issue of forging an economic security alliance with Japan when there's this sense of both give and take, and maybe a lot more take than give when it comes to what the U.S. expects from Japan in this area. I also won't go. Professor Katada, perfectly outlined the investment situation, where you have the welcome investment from Japan in terms of what it means for U.S. technology and advancing U.S. industrialization as a matter of economic security, where you have the welcoming of SoftBank's investment, then you have the opposition to Nippon Steel. I think you're going to continue to see this pattern. And the pattern, I think, is fairly simple. It is a pattern of welcoming greenfield or new investment in these critical sectors and producing in the United States, and being less enthusiastic and maybe opposing mergers and acquisitions or takeovers of U.S. companies that are already in this space, or taking from, I think even something like upstream oil and gas development, investing in drilling in Alaska, et cetera, would also be viewed, I think, as kind of taking from U.S. resources and for foreign gain, if you will. So I think that is also an area of risk. So these are kind of the new parameters that all of these discussions are taking place within. And as I say at the beginning, I do think that U.S. is more and more is going to find itself needing to rely on Japan, and Japan needing to rely on the United States, but trying to maneuver through all these minefields that I've just outlined for you, the shifting U.S. approach on these issues, shifting U.S. thinking on these approaches, without much clarity as to what that is, and just kind of waiting for people to step in the minefield to get bit before finding out. I think this is going to be the biggest challenge. I also think for Japan, the biggest challenge is going to be managing this relationship with the U.S. and trying to find and work toward identifying these areas of common interest, while at the same time being pulled by the U.S. to be pulled away from China. And I think that Japan's role and position between the U.S. and China is just going to be tested even further, and it's going to take every bit of skill in Kasumigaseki to try and maneuver through what will be this other difficult minefield. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much to both of you. I want to start off with a question for Dr. Katada here, based off some of the things that Dr. Beeman was saying, noting this shift in U.S. policy away from sort of the rules towards more concrete actions and outcomes. You've written a lot about Japan as a leading supporter of a rules-based system for the Indo-Pacific. And basically, the role they've spent in the past many years kind of pushing that idea. How do you think Japan is going to be able to navigate that shift in U.S. policy? Will they find a way to cooperate? I guess they will need to, but I mean, could that push Japan to engage other partners to pursue their own objectives, or how's that going to play out?
Yeah, well, thank you for a great question. I enjoyed Michael's talk very much too. So the rule-based order continues to be very important for Japan and the rest of the world. I think for the United States too. Right? And Indo-Pacific strategy that Japan has taken has really been the key instrument that this government has used. And one of which is kind of a coalition building or friend making, or the way in which many will come on board as Japan not necessarily leading, but creating that environment where others can join. And so some of it is the free trade agreement. Obviously Trump 1.0 withdrew from it in his days in office, while Japan rescued that. And now, UK got in, and China even wants in. That's another big chunk of challenge, but that's a really important part. And regional partnership, which has China in it, is now launched, and then it's creating quite a vibrant economy. Obviously China's position in double-sided position is a challenge of its own, but that's kind of the coalition building. Many other issue areas, Japan has done very similar things, and now with the U.S. precarious entry of Trump creating precarious environment, Japan is working quite closely with EU and UK. So that these are the kind of things that Japan will push forward. I don't think that strategy itself will change in any way. I think, if anything, it probably will strengthen as the uncertainty increases with EU leadership.
Yeah, thank you. And to the audience, we have about 15 minutes left on this panel. I will open it to 2 questions to you shortly, so be thinking about those. Follow up for you, Dr. Beeman. As everyone knows, during the first Trump administration, his relationship with Prime Minister Abe was kind of special and really drove that relationship more broadly. Given your experience working in that administration, do you have any thoughts on how that might play out in the current context, given the importance of personal relationships to President Trump?
Right. I think, I was very impressed from the inside and from the outside, watching Prime Minister Abe kind of manage a very challenging situation. I think it got to the point where some of the leaders in Europe seemed a little jealous of the skill set that Japan brought to that relationship. Actually, it's hard. I think there are a lot of reasons to not necessarily be as optimistic this time that is what's going to happen. In part, obviously, because Prime Minister Ishiba is in a minority government, and maybe, and I'm just presuming, maybe not seen as in as strong a position to be able to kind of, not cut deals and deliver on some of these, on some of the issues that they would have to do. So that is a challenge, but Japan is not alone in that space. There are a lot of governments that are in not particularly strong positions politically at home, domestically, to kind of take that approach. So on the one hand, I think that's the case, but on the other hand, I think the complementarity of goals and concerns is still pretty strong when it comes to China, obviously with some important differences in terms of the U.S. not being in the neighborhood and Japan feeling the need to continue to have a productive relationship with China, but President Trump also has indicated he wants to have a regular dialogue, I think, with the president of China and to engage and see where deals can be made, et cetera. So I think it will all come down to the art of how this is implemented and the degree to which Japan is ready to be kind of think about the goals that the administration say they want to achieve and to contribute. As I say, these relationships are seen in the Trump administration in a very transactional way, which won't surprise you. The sense that Japan has had a chronic trade surplus with the United States is, whatever you or I think about it, a very big focus of the thinking in that administration and the importance and need to deal with that. So there's kind of two tacks you can take. You can take the tack of waiting for the Trump administration and the president to subtract from Japan's surplus, however that's achieved, or Japan can think creatively and proactively about how to add to the U.S. side in order to bring that more in balance. So I think Japan is well aware of the need to focus on the second, the latter, as a more constructive way forward. So, I'm not in government, but I certainly remember Japan's reaction to the first administration and how it kind of organized itself to have some of these messages to bring to Washington and to engaged and stay talking. So I think they'll get there, but the challenge will be the degree to which Japan can manage this domestically. Some of these decisions they'll have to make.
Thank you. I'll just go with one more question and then open up to all of you. I guess this is sort of for both of you. In the recent years, both the U.S. and Japan have had different efforts towards diversification and from China, encouraging supply chain shifts. How do you see this under the current administrations? How do you see this playing out among developing countries, in particular in Southeast Asia? I assume Japan is going to continue that approach, but the U.S. may look at that as shifting areas of trade deficits and then target those areas for tariffs. So how is that going to impact both countries' strategies and business opportunities?
I think for the Japanese companies, the whole reshoring or de-risking effort is ongoing. Obviously, Japan, as everybody is putting on the table, by 2010, Japan is the first one to experience this economic coercion. And actually, on the rare earth front, Japan managed it very well. Meanwhile, throughout the Abe period, many companies were already kind of trying to see this risk as to China plus one and many other areas. And with the COVID, there was subsidies provided by the government to really see other diversification efforts to be supported by the government. So all that effort it seems to be gradually paying off on one side of kind of more of the resilience front. On the other hand, obviously, now with the Trump administration coming with a very, U.S. has been always very kind of pushing against China too, but this whole reshoring and friendshoring and other effort is going to intensify even further. And now some of these surveys of the companies implemented by JBIC, Japan Bank for International Cooperation, and so on, has demonstrated that China is no longer kind of the major target of their investment and business strategy. So this is taking place gradually. Obviously, that's added by complemented by the China's own economic difficulties. Meanwhile, Japan doesn't want China to go down, China's economy to go down the tubes. So obviously, there's a significant consumer to really have. So that balancing act is what the Japanese government Japanese businesses have to manage.
Great. So I think the Washington perspective on is as follows. I think any country with which the U.S. has a substantial trade deficit is going to be concerned, and that it will include Japan. So the question is kind of how that plays out. But as much as that is a concern, and it is a big one, China is always an extra level of concern. It's always above everything else in terms of that concern. So the degree to which certainly Washington has become very focused, and this started in the Biden administration, but I guess it started in the Trump administration, but it wasn't apparent yet, but obviously Chinese companies have started to move overseas to different countries in Southeast Asia or Mexico in order to export into the United States and to other markets to avoid tariffs. And this is a huge target on the back of any country that is seen as facilitating or helping or aiding and abetting that kind of situation. So I think one of the reasons you hear about universal tariffs, which we'll see if that happens, I think that's the president's intention. I really do, in one way, shape, or form. So we'll see. But domestically, it may be hard to force that into and to get approval of that with Congress. But I think that this focus on shutting the doors to these imports coming from Chinese companies that are either shipping to Vietnam and they're maybe turning 3 screws and then putting a made in Vietnam label and sending it to the U.S. or building factories and facilities in other countries in order to produce there and export a lot to the U.S. basically. All of those routes are seen as a threat and seen as something that needs action. So I think this is part of the underlying thinking of the need or idea of universal tariffs, which is that it's so hard to shut all these doors to those imports that China's finding a route around tariffs with China that it's easier just to erect a universal tariff on everybody and basically kind of wall off from that perspective. Or they may take a country by country approach and say, well, Vietnam, there's a legacy of you aiding and abetting this and benefiting from it. So we're going to put even higher tariffs on you. So I think the patterns, we don't know what will happen yet, but I think that focus is going to be what you're going to see over the next 3 to 4 years in terms of how is going to be part of the underlying thinking as to why the U.S. is taking these actions and why the president wants to take these actions.
Great, thank you both. I would like to open it to the audience now if there are any questions. Jerome has a microphone. I guess there's one right by you there, Jerome.
I don't know if I need the microphone. Can you guys hear me? Okay, hold on, I'll give you that back then. This is kind of a broad picture question. I'm curious your thoughts on you mentioned a lot about this retreat from a rules-based border from the U.S.'s point of view. So how does that retreat kind of impact the cultural side of economic cooperation? And then on the flip side, how might that impact how individual states go about seeking or competing with each other for investment from abroad, specifically from these Asian communities?
So I think on the second piece, I mean, one of the obviously unique characteristics about the United States and why, and this is being channeled through some of the president, what he says and his decisions, is the idea that the U.S. market is just so enormous that you can't, I mean, you can produce elsewhere and export elsewhere, but you almost can't afford to not be in it and not be present in it. So I think they're counting on that very much in terms of how they see whatever leverage they feel they have in order to force this, and the president said it, I've been saying this for quite a while, this is their view, and the president said it himself, I think, in his address to Davos, in very clear terms, and it really, I think, is important to listen to and understand what he's saying in terms of what they're thinking, which is this basic principle. If you are in the United States market, if you're making your good here, if you are, you'll have the most, you'll have tax cuts, you'll have unlimited energy, you'll have everything you need to operate here, and this is where we want you. But if you are producing elsewhere and plan on, as part of your business model, exporting to the United States, well, good luck. That may or may not go well for you. And I think part of the misunderstood part of the first administration was the idea that unpredictability for the business environment, to kind of get to your first point, is the point. That is the point. The degree to which companies have to make different choices in order to have predictability is no longer a function of the rules that the U.S. was demanding others abide by, and the U.S. was abiding by itself with accountability. Instead, it's a function of whether you have decided to invest here or not, and it may or may not go well for you if you don't. So, to your point about cultural side of how companies are operating with one another, that is I think that is sort of the U.S. brand now, which is everything will be perfect for you if you're here, and if you're not, I can't necessarily help you.
So just quickly add, I really think this unpredictability is going to be the name of the game. And I think COVID kind of includes some kind of unpredictability. I think it's kind of like Trump, but different ways. And now, everything for the businesses, rather than just in time, which is efficiency seeking kind of strategy, but also, but actually just in case. So diversification and risk hedging and all that will be an important part.
Thank you. I know there was a question there. Are there any others? We're running low on time. We can field a couple at once if there are. Otherwise, so would be rushed.
I think you may have just covered that a bit, but in the case of, say, automotive, where Toyota is making vehicles in the U.S., do you see that as being interrupted, increasing, or decreasing?
I think
Your Toyota hat.
I really can't put the Toyota hat on, but I think it will continue to be very significant and also probably increasing over, at least during the Trump's time. Now, I think that would be kind of a strategy, a wiser strategy for Japan, at least again, as a part of the hedging. And now I think very soon, 2/3 of many of the Japanese vehicles are, I guess some people know better than the numbers, but it's already in that level. And I think most of that will continue.
I think the area of real challenge in this site was just in Seoul last week and heard this from Korean companies, and I'm 100% sure Japanese companies are in a similar situation than others, is, a sense that, these companies have invested here, right? There are a lot of companies that are making finished products that consumers see, or they're finished intermediate products like steel or that are identifiable as a key input into other things. And so the real concern is, as much as they're contributing, they're concerned that tariffs that will place on the inputs, on the parts or the materials that are coming into the United States is going to raise their costs and is going to make it more difficult to produce economically here and make an even more challenging environment, even though they feel they're contributing by making these things in the U.S. So, and there is a reality that some of these parts, some of these materials are just not available in the United States. But I think it's important for everyone. This is a really important area, I think, in terms of the theme of this talk, which is economic security and cooperation, which is the administration wants very much to create the kind of manufacturing ecosystem that Japan has, that Korea has, and that others still have on some level. I think they've overlooked the point that Japan also is depending on imports in order to maintain that model. But setting that aside, I think they feel they want these things made here, these parts and materials to be produced in the United States that are then produced in U.S. plants and then sold to consumers in the U.S. So that's the approach. So if you take that approach, this is where the cooperation comes in, because it's not, I think the words are going to matter a lot. So it's not that Japanese companies can't get these products in the United States, even though they can't. It is until they can get these products in the United States, there is a reason to focus on a more measured approach to thinking about a strategic and economic security strategy for the United States that involves a reindustrialization in this sector, instead of just assuming the U.S. is going to continue to depend on imports for these things forever. Because even if that happens or not, if you say it, they're not going to. You're denying their whole focus and reason for the policy to begin with, which is to produce everything here, which is their kind of starting point.
Right. Well, thank you both so much for joining. We're going to wrap up the panel there. So thank you. Yeah, so with that, we will move on to the second panel, looking at the role of emerging technology and export control and other measures that the two countries are using to carry out their economic security ambitions. So I would like to welcome to the stage our next panelists. With us, we have Crystal Pryor, a senior fellow with the Center for Policy Research at SUNY Albany. She is also a senior advisor of the Pacific Forum and adjunct fellow at the East and West Center. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of Washington and was a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard University, where she had written her dissertation on strategic trade control practices in advanced countries. She also holds a master's degree in political science from the University of Tokyo and spent 6 years living and working in Tokyo. We're also joined with by Daisuke Kawai, who is visiting from Tokyo. Many thanks for taking the trip to Seattle to join us. Daisuke is a project assistant professor and the deputy director of the Economic Security Program at RCAT at the University of Tokyo. He also serves as an Asia Fellow on the Center for International Private Enterprise and a senior advisor for bond strategic planning to the Bond Investors Network. He was previously a research fellow for Indo-Pacific Affairs at the Japan Institute for International Affairs. And in 2024, he was nominated as a David Rockefeller Fellow, the Trilateral Commission, and appointed as the representative of the Asia Pacific. So, very glad to have you both joining us today. We will begin with remarks from Crystal. So, hand it over to you.
Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here today. This is an important discussion on U.S.-Japan economic security and technology cooperation. I want to begin by thanking the National Bureau of Asian Research for organizing this event and for their ongoing work in fostering informed dialogue on vital strategic issues. I also extend my thanks to Consul General Makoto Yori for his insightful opening remarks that have set the stage for today's conversation, as well as the other esteemed panelists joining me today for sharing their insights. Today, I'll address the evolution of U.S. and Japanese economic security policies, focusing on their twin objectives of promoting and protecting advanced technologies. I'll explore the legislative and policy tools shaping these efforts, delve a bit into the topic of export controls, which I've actually been researching since 2012 for my dissertation, and it was still a very niche topic at the time. It's grown significantly these years, and conclude with some reflections on the future of U.S.-Japan cooperation under the second Trump administration. Economic security, as we've been discussing, has become a defining issue in an era of global uncertainty. Both the United States and Japan recognize the critical role and central role of advanced technologies in underpinning national security, economic competitiveness, and global leadership. From semiconductors to critical minerals, these technologies are vital for developing resilient supply chains and sustaining robust defense capabilities. While Japan has adopted a unified and strategic approach to economic security, the United States has pursued a more segmented and less integrated strategy. Despite these differences, our two nations share strategic goals, underscoring the need for alignment and collaboration to ensure and secure long-term stability and growth in the Indo-Pacific. To understand these efforts, it's essential to examine two primary pillars of economic security: promotion and protection. Promotion focuses on fostering innovation and investment, while protection ensures these advancements remain secure from external threats. Japan's Economic Security Promotion Act, or ESPA, provides a model for integrating promotion and protection into a unified framework. I think my co-panelist, Daisuke Kawai, will talk more about this in his remarks. But the ESPA emphasizes supply chain stability, critical infrastructure security, and technological innovation. It's a comprehensive strategy that highlights Japan's forward-looking approach to economic security. In contrast, U.S. efforts, though ambitious, have been less cohesive. The United States' approach to economic security has been characterized by sector-specific initiatives, focusing on areas such as semiconductors and, until recently, renewable energy. This strategy involves targeted investments in the strategic use of tariffs and sanctions to protect domestic industries and maintain technological leadership. The CHIPS and Science Act, which allocated $53 billion for semiconductor manufacturing, was a significant step forward. However, unlike Japan's comprehensive framework, the U.S. lacks a unified strategic roadmap or risk taxonomy.
leading to a more fragmented approach. Noteworthy collaborative efforts such as the 2022 Semiconductor Strategy and the Economic 2+2 Framework do illustrate the potential of US-Japan cooperation. Yet even before the moves of the Trump administration in the past few days, these initiatives have demanded sustained commitment, particularly in areas like workforce development and cross-border innovation. While promoting advanced technologies is essential, safeguarding them through protective measures like export controls is also important. This brings us to the significance of multilateral coordination in ensuring the effectiveness of such protective measures. Export controls are indispensable tools for safeguarding sensitive technologies. The U.S. has long relied on export controls as an economic security tool, with a recent example being its coordination efforts through the AUKUS Trilateral Partnership. However, history shows the risk of relying on unilateral measures. For example, the overly restrictive satellite export controls implemented in the 1990s resulted in significant losses in U.S. market share and spurred competitors to develop alternatives. The response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine underscores the power of multilateral coordination. A broad coalition of nations, including the US, Japan, the EU, and others, have imposed sanctions and export controls targeting critical commodities and technologies. This collective action significantly reduced Russia's imports of high-priority items critical to its war effort, demonstrating how multilateral implementation prevents adversaries from finding alternative sources or workarounds. The lesson is clear. Export controls are most effective when aligned across like-minded nations, ensuring both security and strategic advantages. Critical and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, including the recent advancements like DeepSeek mentioned by the Consul General, are transforming industries and redefining economic security. The rapid pace of AI innovation highlights the limits of relying solely on export controls to maintain a technological edge, as competitors like China continue to advance despite the existing restrictions. To secure leadership in any domain, nations must see export controls as a last line of defense, while committing to long-term investments in research, ethical standards, workforce development, and developing resilient supply chains for critical technologies. As we reflect on these efforts, it's important to consider how the US and Japan can deepen their collaboration in the years ahead, particularly under the new administration. The second Trump administration introduces both opportunities and challenges for our cooperation on economic security. While the strategic alignment between our two countries remains strong, domestic political considerations, including protectionist policies, may create additional friction. A notable example is the US decision to block the US Steel-Nippon merger. It highlights the tensions between economic security goals and domestic industrial policy, as Professor Katada mentioned. To navigate these complexities, both nations must prioritize trust and long-term collaboration. Japan's cohesive approach to economic security offers valuable lessons for the United States, while the enduring US-Japan alliance serves as the foundation for advancing our shared objectives. By aligning our strategies and fostering mutual trust, the US and Japan can build a resilient framework for economic security in the Indo-Pacific. In conclusion, the evolving US-Japan partnership is a testament to the enduring strength of our alliance. As we face an increasingly complex global environment, it's imperative to remain focused on our shared goals of technological leadership, resilient supply chains, and robust security frameworks. Thank you again to the National Bureau of Asian Research for organizing this event, and I look forward to continuing this important dialogue with all of you.
Thank you, Crystal. And over to you, Daisuke.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to the NBR, the DAG, and President Wells, as well as the Consul General Yori-san, for having me here. It took a 9-hour flight to here, but it was absolutely worth it, I would say. And seeing such a beautiful, views, which is quite spectacular. It is also a privilege to join such a distinct group of experts here in Seattle. And actually, it's the first time for me to visit Seattle, so I'm pretty much enjoying. And before diving into my remarks, let me just add a little of my background as well, which I didn't write in my bio. From 2020, when I worked as a Japan Institute of International Affairs. I was also seconded to the Cabinet Office of Japan partially to legislate Japan's Economic Security Promotion Act. It has 4 pillars, and I was in charge of critical emerging technology pillars, which I led the team. And also during the recent Liberal Democratic Party's leaders election, I was also part of the advisory council of the Prime Minister Ishiba, where I was in charge of economic security briefing to him. So, so as here is a quite close community, I wanted to give you my background, which is I don't usually disclose. And so over the past decade, we have witnessed a dramatic shift in the global order. The intensifying US-China technological competition has transformed economic security into a core dimension of a state of power. At the heart of the lies, the race to protect and advance critical and emerging technologies. For Japan, the economic security goes to the core of our autonomy and survival. Japan has long excelled in technology, but our dependence on external resources, combined with the economy deeply intertwined in the global supply chains, that poses a unique vulnerabilities. An example, which was also mentioned by the President of Wales, being in the 2010 the incident when China halted the rare earth mineral exports to Japan. These challenges have driven us taken proactive steps. In 2021, the Council for Promotion of Economic Security outlined the 3 primary objectives. The first, the increasing self-reliance. Second, the securing advantage and the indispensability through the innovation. The third, the maintaining and strengthening the international order. These principles culminated in Japan's Economic Security Promotion Act, which aims to guard strategic industries without resorting to a wholesale decoupling from China, because some of our interdependencies are beneficial. Japan, like the United States, recognizes the importance of adopting a targeted approach, what has been called a small yarn and high fence strategy. And therefore, rather than blanket disengagement, we focus on identifying and securing strategic sectors and dual-use technologies that have direct bearing on our national security. This leads us to emerging technology and export control, which prevent the transfer of sensitive technologies to adversaries, which Crystal mentioned. And implementing this control is becoming increasingly complex for several reasons. The first, the supply chains are typically global in scale and multi-phased, and making difficult track precisely certainly components and intellectual properties. The second, the line between civilian and military applications can be blurry, especially with the even growing importance of AI and advanced the semiconductors to international security. The controlling these dual-use items, actually the Japanese government doesn't call dual-use technology, to say multi-use technologies because due to it's a pacifism. So anyway, so controlling dual-use technologies item requires balancing national and global security interests with advantages of innovation, research collaboration, and open markets. The Japan's Economic Security Promotion Act exemplifies this delicate balancing act with its 4 pillars of ensuring a stable supply chain and stable supply critical products and safeguarding essential infrastructure, supporting the development of key emerging technologies, and protecting sensitive intellectual properties. Each is designed to strengthen our security while minimizing harm to legitimate trade and innovation. For instance, the non-disclosure of a patent application is an attempt to stop the linkage of critical technological know-how without unduly stifling scientific progress. Of course, these measures cannot work in isolation, and Japan's experience shows that the building credible economic security framework requires broader partnership, as we discussed. So our push for the friend-shoring seeks to bring together like-minded countries in designing consistent export controls and technology alliance. We must also respect the differences in countries' economic strategies and the degrees of the risk they are willing to accept. Hence, our one-size-fits-all model for technology governance is likely to be ineffective and unsustainable. Let me also stress that neither Japan nor the most democratic nation wish for autarky. Technological competition teaches us that the open markets, collaboration, and the competition the feed innovation. Furthermore, the restricting access to advanced technologies could inadvertently push developing countries closer to other nations that can provide something similar to lower cost. So we've seen this with the 5G and maybe now with AI, and underscoring why we need to couple the security objectives with affordable technologies and the support mechanism. So looking ahead, Japan's national security and economic competitiveness will increasingly rely on its ability to maintain technological edge. In the absence of a national body with a jurisdiction to adjudicate economic security disputes, something that WTO cannot handle, as like-minded nations, we must collaborate, whether through the G7, the Quad, or other unilateral agreements that can provide a framework for consistent policy coordination. In conclusion, the role of emerging technologies and export controls in economic security is both critical and complex. As Japan continues to refine its own policies, our focus is on finding the right mix of product protective measures and bolstering innovation. Ultimately, we seek to uphold the rule-based economic order. The technology is a shared resource that can power prosperity and solve global challenges, provided we develop it responsibly and defend against misuse. But by working with the United States and our other partners, we can ensure that the development and the benefits of emerging technologies are widely shared in manner consistent with our shared values. Though the road ahead will be challenging, the pursuit of the resilient and rule-based technological ecosystem is an essential goal. We must all work together. And also finally, I just wanted to add a little bit for the discussion in the previous session. As Professor Katada mentioned, now corporate private sector needed to keep up with the implementation of the Economic Security Promotion Act. One of the survey I recently conducted with Washington DC, the think tank called Center for International Private Enterprise. The particular that survey showed the small medium enterprises (SMEs) facing significant challenges. Actually, while 71.3% of surveyed SMEs are aware of economic security risks, however, the 95.9% of the SMEs have not made any organizational changes to address these issues. Also, 78.3% these companies are unaware of governmental support available under Economic Security Promotion Act. So I think better outreach and communication about Economic Security Promotion Act is essential. And also, when it comes to the questions from the gentleman about Toyota's continuing investment in the United States, I think that trend will continue. I think because the Japanese government, strictly, I would say, urge Japanese private sector to keep investment in the United States to, let's say, to build up new factories or any other hardware industries. So I think that trend will surely continue. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
So I'd like to kick it off with a question kind of directed at Crystal, but I welcome both of your thoughts. The Biden administration really leaned heavily into the use of export controls to sort of prevent the diffusion of technologies, specific advanced technologies to China. And then in recent days, there's been the news that both you and the Consul General have brought up about China's AI breakthroughs in DeepSeek, which raises questions about the effectiveness of export controls, whether that means they weren't enforced thoroughly enough, or whether they just led China to sort of innovate around the controls. What's your thought on how effective export controls have been to accomplish those goals, and if that would be a meaningful avenue for the United States to continue to pursue in the Trump administration?
Thank you for the question. Do you mean specific to semiconductors?
Mainly, but achieving the goals of preventing the spread of potentially dual use or security risk technologies to China.
I think the problem is that, well, the first problem is that the United States can't unilaterally impose export controls. There are other ways that China can access the technologies that we're concerned about, which is why it was so important that the Dutch, Japanese, and United States Americans came on board with sort of same set of semiconductor export controls when it comes to the advanced semiconductor manufacturing. So that's sort of the first problem. I think the second problem is that there's not necessarily consensus on what the threat is, and to the degree to which other countries don't perceive the same threat as the United States, the more we're going to struggle with consistent implementation or the effectiveness of export controls. I sort of have been, I think I meant to publish something and never actually did about sort of the idea of a COCOM 2.0, but the idea that sort of we're reinstating this Cold War method or era of applying export controls. And the problem is that to some degree that worked, but we kind of agreed on what the threat was, and the relationship between the West and the Soviet bloc was totally different than the relationship we use today with China. So trying to sort of refashion these old economic security tools for these new purposes, I think is sort of a fool's errand to begin with. That said, I mean, I think export controls do have their place in certain narrow applications to certain degree on either end uses or end users, and we had that consensus for sort of a brief moment in time after 9/11, and when we sort of agreed that weapons of mass destruction and the means of delivering them shouldn't get to the hands of non-state actors. So there was some consensus around that. I think we're unfortunately moving away from that, and all that to say, I mean, there are some implications for the broader non-proliferation regime as well. So I think that we have to be very judicious in our application and make sure that we have, before we sort of just unilaterally apply them, that there is consensus on what the threat is. I think there are going to be different groups of countries that are sort of aligned on different, first of all, you produce the sensitive technologies in question, and then that we're aligned on the threat perception as well. So I think it has to be very judicious, has to be narrow, and again, it has to be the last line of defense, not the first.
Yeah, thanks. I do have a separate question, but yeah, if you want to chime in there.
Just one sentence. This is my hypothesis, but I would say the strict export control really encourages the country, targeted country, to make an effort in innovation. I think that really applies to the Chinese case now.
Yeah, thank you. I also meant to mention at the beginning of this panel, both Crystal and Daisuke recently published essays with us that actually came out yesterday. There's some QR codes at the back of the room. If you're interested, you can scan those and read their essays after the event. I have a question, Daisuke, kind of based on what you wrote and mentioned here about Japan's more comprehensive approach to economic security that's much more thorough in terms of legal and policy actions. How do you think that has impacted innovation in Japan? And And overall, do you think that's a net success, or has there been consequences? Basically, how effective has that been? I guess if you have any suggestions of how it could be improved upon, if you think there's any areas there.
Thank you. As the Economic Security Promotion Act has a pillar of the development of critical emerging technologies, and which also has several items such as funding research institution or in the private sector companies to fund and also encourage them to devise new technologies which should be applied to the economic security purposes, but obviously it will be a military application for sure. And as you know, Japan is a pacifist country. When it comes to the funding from military defense, that's really the problematic for the private sector to apply for, and even academic institutions, the so-called K-Pro. So that's why Japanese government, came up with the idea that using term economic security rather than military security or national security to encourage the private sector to foster their innovation. So in line with that, quantum computing and also the drone and also small modular reactors of a nuclear power plants have been devised recently based on this economic security promotion fund. So I think that the current is really foster the innovations in Japan. But I think also one of the problems that scheme has now is it only targets the research institutions and the major private sectors. So it needs to be expanded to the SMEs, which may have critical technology components. And the problem we have is we don't have the person who have a talent and who know what kind of component which can be applied to the military application or economic security application. So we call it in Japanese a meikiki jinzai, which is the person who knows the technology very well, and then also military tactics as well. So that's a problem we also have to consider.
Thanks. We'll go with one more question and then open it up to the audience. So be thinking ahead of anything you'd like to ask. Crystal, just following up on that, Japan's sort of a more comprehensive approach to economic security. If there's any lessons that could be drawn there that the U.S. could be applying when the new administration is looking towards its approach to these issues.
I think there are plenty of lessons to be learned. Whether there's receptiveness to learning any lessons right now, I think is a separate question. I think just generally speaking, and this is for any administration, but you need to, as a country, be thinking a little bit more long term and thinking about investments, where investments need to be made in terms of education, human resources, talent development, talent acquisition. And I think even our immigration policies and the ways in which we are, as was mentioned, there are many Chinese nationals working in AI US. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's just sort of doing sort of a sophisticated risk analysis of sort of where the benefits and costs are of having an open ecosystem in terms of research and technological innovation. So it just feels like something that is probably not super possible in the next few years to be thinking about, especially talking about the destruction of, or sort of this new focus on the results and the outcomes and not so much the processes.
Thanks. Are there any audience questions? I do want the microphone. Jerome is right behind you.
In the context of this announced $100 billion investments from Japan into AI in the US, in the context of innovation, has this scope been kind of clear about where this $100 billion is going to go? Is it actually Japanese companies doing R&D in the US, or is it private sector investment in the AI in the US?
So that project called the Stargate project, and actually that's more related to the U.S. private sector. So SoftBank CEO Son Masayoshi will be the chairman of the Stargate project. However, the SoftBank only runs for the other accounting department, and the actual operation will be made by the OpenAI, the company, the OpenAI, ChatGPT, OpenAI. So, and it basically it's more investment in the U.S. AI private sector, and devise new generation of AI, which is called artificial general intelligence (AGI) in the United States, and which will be applied to the U.S. national security and government efficiency. So it doesn't really have something with Japanese government or Japanese national interest, but certainly having strong relation with the United States by investing in a lot, that may deepen further relations between Japan and the US, particularly in the light of the Trump, its orientation and the features.
Thanks. Any more questions? I see one in the back row here.
Thank you. My question is that how do you think the government balance between the security and innovation? I mean, previously the government did not. I think the few cases which the government intervened to the private company, but nowadays the cases are very. How can I say? It's increasing. The number is increasing. Like EU intervened to the OpenAI. And the U.S. intervened to the Japan Steel and the TikTok and so on. So my question is, as I said to you, how do you think the government balance between the innovation and security?
In Japan's cases, I think it's quite unique. Japanese government doesn't really, I would say, given the pressures to the private sector to balance something or regulate something, because Japan really sticks to the WTO principles, which is all private sector or private companies unilaterally is fairly treated, so as an equal. So that's why when it comes to the, let's say, the removing the Huawei's components in the telecommunication devices, that's not something Japanese government urge private sector to remove it. Actually, it's a kind of a private sector's its own effort. But definitely, the government might create this kind of an atmosphere where the private sector may need to remove that. But I can certainly, say that the government doesn't really intervene in the private sector's activities, even though they encourage, they wouldn't, order or urge them to do something.
It's a great question. To broaden it out just a little bit, I think the question is how countries balance economics and security, which has actually been sort of my driving interest in researching why I was interested in dual-use technologies in the first place, and also export controls. I think it is really representative of how countries sort of see this balance between their economics and their security. And I think the United States has been unique in having the luxury to separate the two, economics and security, to date. And this is reflected even in our academic traditions in the United States. We see sort of security societies separated from international political economy and such, but I've always thought they must be related somehow. And so I think the U.S., what's new is that the U.S. is confronting a time in which we actually do have to think about and integrate and balance the two, the economics and the security side of things. But and then more specifically when it comes to innovation, I think this is the $1 or billion question. It's like I don't think there's like an answer, right? It's a constant, has to be a constant question and a constant reflection. And I think there are going to be course corrections over time, and that is what we're seeing right now. I think we collectively feel like we maybe focus too much on the innovation and the openness and sort of the acceleration, and now we need to create more walls and slow things down a little bit more, even if it is painful and even if it slows down our innovation. So I think these are critical discussions, and we have to keep asking the questions. There's not one right answer, and I think that these things change over time as well.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yeah, Art.
Hi, great presentation. Macro question about the flow of capital. In the 90s and 2000s, the flow of capital was from the West to the East, particularly China, for Industry 2.0 and 3.0. Last 5 years, we are seeing a trend toward bringing back that capital to reindustrialize the West with Industry 4.0. So how does Japan look at that flow of capital back to the West? And the second part of that question is, where does that leave the Global South in terms of capital development?
Capital flow, actually, that trend, I mean, which means capital from Asia to West is quite favorable, I would say, because it's less risks, I would say. In the emerging market, definitely, sometimes we face the several challenges and difficulties, particularly in China. Let's say if you set up a million companies in China, you have to create a joint venture formulation, and which definitely, I would say, encourage the technology linkage to the China. So that case we have seen already is a kind of a catalyst for, particularly for Japan, to see the capital flow should be in the West rather than Asia, particularly in China. And when it comes to the Global South, Japanese private sectors now invest a lot in India as the alternative market instead of China. I also serve as a geopolitical advisor to the Japan's Association for Corporate Executives, called the Keizai Doyukai. And the most located Doyukai's private sector companies, members start to invest in India and focus on India and set up companies there. And owing to the greater relations between the Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and Modi, they reformed a lot regulatory framework for Japanese companies as well. So now, majority of Japanese private sectors are really willing to go on in India which is the leader of the Global South.
Just to comment on the Global South. The Global South is, and there's so many different subgroups: Southeast Asia versus South Asia versus Latin America versus Africa. I mean, I think China has definitely identified the opportunities there in terms of its Belt and Road initiatives, and Japan as well. I think is definitely. I anticipate that, sort of given where we're going now with, for example, our U.S. foreign assistance funding, that we are going to be pulling out from the Global South. I don't think if sort of private sector follows public sector at all, we're going to see other countries coming in from probably East Asia to sort of build action that the U.S. is going to do there.
Thank you. So we're pretty much at time. I am going to squeeze in one last quick question here and ask for quick responses. I know, Professor Katada, you have to run very quickly. If you need to leave, please feel free to. But yeah, if you would like to go with the final question and please give your responses.
So far, we've been mainly discussing manufacturing goods, technology, the like. I'm just curious about the raw material issue. Donald Trump's goal is to drill, baby, drill. And if the U.S. does that, and effectively is producing more oil and LNG for export, what would you see how that would that be affecting the Japanese gas, oil?
I don't think the mic was on, but you're asking about U.S. oil and LNG policies and how that's going to affect Japan's imports.
Yeah, how would that affect the Japanese importing of energy products, oil, gas, etc.? Would the U.S. be a candidate for supplying?
Right. I think certainly Japan will more import the oil and gases from the United States, even though Japan's had, I think from 7 years ago, Japan has started to diversify its the resources and from less dependency on the other countries. But I think in the particularly in the Trump administration, I think Japan will import more a lot of gases or oils from the United States rather than buying from the Russia or any other from India, which bought from Russia. And so I think that will be the more legitimate for Japan.
All right, with that, I would like to wrap it up. I would like to thank our panelists, but I would also like to thank the Consulate General of Japan and CG Fiori for making his opening remarks today. Pleasure working with you as always. And thank you all for coming. So,